Hello, ladies and gentlemen. I am currently on vacation, but League continues, and we gotta talk about KC versus Fnatic. Maybe more in peculiar, or in particular, rather, we gotta talk about Fnatic. KC made it through. It's important to remember when it comes to KC, they managed to do it somehow, in the lower bracket when they lost to G2, but it kind of looked out of sorts in that round where they got outdrafted left and right. KC have resilience, they are I've been saying this for a very long time, but Vladi and Kalis, they really, really don't carry themselves as rookies in how they are as in comms, how they are as teammates, how engaged they are. The average view of how rookies are is that they are timid and they kind of look for someone to follow, and they're easy to mold. But Vladi and especially Kalis is a player is very demanding, and I think this is a team that mechanically just has you know, a fantastic, fantastic ceiling. It's always shown in the team fighting, and I'm super, super excited for their potential run. I think probably the most exciting team to come out of the lower bracket. I'm super happy that we potentially get to see KC play back-to-back best of fives. The only thing, if anything, I do think that their drafts game 1 and 2 were quite scary, but they picked things that they were confident on. They brought back the Zoe, the Lucianami combo looked crisp. I've always kind of liked, Targamas on, the range champs if he has the space to play them in other roles. And that one, was kind of a new adaptation. Them, of course, bringing out the Galio, this is a different side to Kana. So it's very clear that KC is adding layers to their gameplay because even though Targamas was struggling on range champions in winter, it kind of came down to the fact that their comps were rather incomplete. But if you have a Galio top with a Zinzao, you can do some work and you can be flexible in multiple roles. I think a lot of people, they underestimate the idea of being able to play certain champions. It's like a single player can be great on a champion, but in terms of it fitting to your team, that's always a different question. It's like there's a lot of players that can play Nidalee. It's not the question of like it being difficult to play Nidalee in a lot of cases. It's a question of how good is your team at closing out games with Nidalee? Can they play the right supporting champions? Can they play on your tempo? Are you good enough to understand the windows you have to pressure enemy chickens and so forth? That's the complicated part, not actually like operating the champion. So I'm excited for Casey's run against Koi and then G2. But now on to Fnatic. Fnatic, I definitely thought this year would be different. Very, very different considering they brought in Mickey. I thought that he was going to plug some macro issues that they have later on in the game. I think Mickey and Upset as the bot lane has been very, very good for this team. I feel like the Fnatic story, it always kind of pans out in one or two ways. So basically, the first way, either they do super, super well in the regular season, and then they stagnate, and then they fall off, and then they lose against an opponent that has improved throughout the split. Or they start off quite bad, and then they band-aid fix, and then they also eventually reach a point where they lose against a strong opponent. Most of the time, of course, G2, but this time also Casey, who also have, many elements. Geez, fly. Many elements that are similar to G2. They are a team that is very resilient. Strategically, they have a lot of depth, and they have good, individual players, and and a very, very ambitious coaching staff. With Fnatic, that's the main thing. It's like either it pulls you in that they are so good in the regular season, or it pulls you in that they're making a comeback. They are slowly climbing and getting better. But I feel like the main thing is, the poisonous thing always is that I feel like Fnatic always try to address their issues a little bit too late. In terms of your habits, how you play, everything that is good also comes with the bad. That's why in periods of underperformance, you're breaking down the things that you do that are inherently, maybe things that do good for you, but you break them down because they are kind of, a part of the things that also make you bad. For example, over-aggression, right? This is the easiest example. Over-aggression can easily be, maybe that's tied to your aggression that is very successful too. And then in the context of overreaching, that is the double-edged sword of that conversation. Okay? And you need to kind of break it down and you start from scratch. And I felt like in this series, that's what Fnatic kind of tried to do based off of the previous result. It's like, oh, we finally need to get our shit together. We need to focus on these things, these things, these things. And in that process, I felt like they lost the things that actually, made them competitive while trying to, short-term fix a lot of the issues. And obviously, the issues that Fnatic have, they are no longer, short-term issues. I think we've reached a point where the core that is topside, I genuinely believe, the Fnatic players, all of them individually, it's like similar to the Yak story, right? We all could see a vision where Yak would be a lot better in the next team that he plays. Sometimes it's very, very hard to break your habits and break your circumstance and break how you behave if there are too many reoccurring themes in your environment. I can tell you guys a story of how I stopped smoking, right? I stopped smoking cold turkey when I switched apartments and I had a different living arrangement because I could rebuild my own habits. The habit of my smoking is associated with all the details around me, whether it was a meal or a certain moment or a certain action. And I feel like that's where Fnatic is at. The patterns of how they lose, they tend to reemerge, the sense of over-aggression, and then gets to the point where the synergy between the jungle is no longer there. Humanoid tends to get caught, and then they try to overcompensate, right? Often when you are under pressure, under stress, a very natural response is to lean back into comfort. And comfort is usually what has brought you to the point where you're at. There's been moments where you have a peak. I can see the same, for example, with the Roddy Sack, the boys we're playing on stage, right? There's a new stimuli, new kind of pressure, and then you kind of revert back to the things that, to the place where maybe you were a year ago or 2 years ago, just because it's a little bit more comfortable. And in moments of stress, you kind of lean onto it. That's why that repetition and how you scream and how you practice is so important, because you want what you lean back on when things get tough to also be tough. That's why you see the same players win time and time again. G2 managed to bounce back because inherently when Caps gets pushed, his level of comfort comes back to, a very, very successful version of himself. And that's what separates winners from, of course, people that take second place. And it's a bummer. So the conversation about Fnatic, what do you change? In the middle of the year is very, very difficult, very, very difficult. I think it was clear that they tried to change things in between. I was very hopeful for the addition of Duffman, right? But there's only so much a single person can do, because Duffman had such a big impact on G2's previous last 2 years, where in the first Yike alteration with Hatsama, Mickey, and so forth, they were very early game oriented, and they, of course, worked super, super hard to just snowball through bot, make sure that Mickey is like roaming, going. And then as an additional layer, what came after that, of course, was just the invades of Yike and so forth. And they realized when they came to internationals, MSI, Worlds, they couldn't really play like that. And then coming into the next year, the second year, they turned into a very, very macro-intensive team with, of course, Caps being full-on side lane. And they played, of course, the lane swaps. They were full-on macro, and they managed to revamp themselves from a position, of course, of having less success at the World Championship. Obviously, the result was the same at the World Championship, but we can't really compare the two, right? I think that they were far more successful in the second one, because those wins that they got against Weibo and Hanwha, I think, were pretty fake in the first Worlds there with Hansama and, of course, Mickey and Yike. Yeah. Fnatic, if you want to get really, really creative, I feel bad for Oscarini, because I do think there is some talent there. He has had some series where he's good. I think in winter, it was super important, pushing Fnatic over the finish line and actually getting them as a team to, of course, that series against KC where they went to 5. I think that split was very, very good from Oscarini, but there's a very big kind of inconsistency. It doesn't seem like he's playing the same game as his teammates. And for me, it comes down to, what I'm thinking about, right? Just because of accessibility, I'm thinking if you want to get really creative from Fnatic's position now and salvage Summit, I think you got to bring back Wunder. Sure, you can say, Yamato, you're biased, Wunder is not the same. Team Heretics, he didn't look good. I don't think he looked that great on Team Heretics. But I think Wunder is a player that keeps the team grounded. And he's a very, very good voice to have in the game. And he might not bring the same level, the same level of firepower as a Kana and so forth, but he would be exactly what I think this Fnatic roster needs. A very, very vocal butterfly. Very, very vocal top laner that can direct the game while not being a part of the game. And obviously the NLC is very, very different, but I speak from experience. Like when he came in, he led the whole game 1v9, and that was like him, coming straight off the sofa. I think that you ring up Wunder, give him a mercenary contract, boom, rock and roll. He just is going to elevate this team, his experience together with Mickey. And I think that he could be the balance that this team definitely needs, because this team has firepower, man. Mickey, Razo, Humanoid, mechanically are super, super good, but they never find themselves in fights or positions that make sense. I think that this Fnatic roster is very, very good at destroying teams that are uncoordinated. That's why regular split, they look like absolute demons. Their early games are really, really strong. And then with their big leads, they actually manage to, make it all the way. But their setup, how they play around sides, this is where it's inconsistent. Their fights are sporadic. And rather than then choosing the fights, the enemy gets to choose the fights. And then hopefully for Fnatic, they outplay it or not. Looking at this KC Fnatic series, it was very, very clear. KC, they got to choose all the fights. I didn't see a single fight the Fnatic actually won. They got their leads through early game, a couple of ganks, But then it's like KC chose to fight here, they outnumber, and then Fnatic is too slow on the hover, they're not on the same page, and they are doing TPs that are not necessary, and they just didn't have something to really, really glue them together. And I think at this point, I don't see a world, especially with how competitive the LEC is. It's like if Fnatic don't make worlds with this roster, if not even already not winning a split with this roster is a big disappointment, right? Not winning, not going to worlds because there's 3 spots and the opponents are looking better and better. Like G2's improving, KC is improving, of course Koi is improving. It might be the time to do something sporadic because you do have a big window due to the existence of MSI to prepare for summer. And that's going to be super, super intense. And I think that Wunder might just be the number one thing to plug and play. And, I said this some time ago for, previous alterations with Razok Humanoid. I think individually they're super, super good, and I think their next team, they're going to be fantastic. But just like my smoking habits, they just revert back to smoking when they're under that stress and pressure. That's what it seems like. They just revert back to the smoking, the bad habit that they try to work away from. And the work of the split doesn't really stick. Yeah. I wonder, I wonder how they're going to approach things. There's something about, this Fnatic group, like obviously these guys are my homies, but seeing them lose, it hurts. This is something that just gets it hurts in a very, very special way, really, really special way. It's like deja vu, but the worst kind, because somehow, you thought it would be different. Yeah. You thought it would be different. Kind of like that, that significant other that you break up with, and then you think, oh, maybe this time will be different. This time will be, they've changed. No, they haven't. We gotta move on. We gotta move on. We gotta move on. Oh, yeah, Wunder. That's my secret angle. Wunder. As like in regards to the series, like the details that we can add, I think Game 3 draft insanely desperate. Game 1 and 2, they tried, the Rumble, Rice, Kana draft with the Zairakan. I think that makes perfect sense. Zairakan works super well when you lane well and you can set up ganks. They burn summoners, both and so forth. I think draft-wise that makes sense. I think Game 1 as well, they had the Scion into the Draven, Jace, Wukong. That was a very tricky draft that Casey pulled off, but if you just go through those games, Fnatic never really had like an honest fight on their terms. It was always on KC's terms. and it seemed like they could always choose. And I feel like if KC can choose when to fight, I do think that they are just the best. You really need to challenge them the same way Koi did with stacking dragons and being first for a condition that actually takes them to a victory, not having a game play like a gameplay, let's say, style that is driven by short-term profits, right? Short-term profits can be very, very good, but you gotta focus on the big picture. And usually the teams that do figure out a way to win series in playoffs. So that's it. Couple of thoughts. Wanted to, say something to the YouTube too. I left a little short on Twitch. I'll be back on Sunday. I'll give you guys updates on what's going on. We're gonna do a rundown, of course, of the KC Koi series, the KC, the potentially KC G2 finals. I'll be home for, and fingers crossed for a little bit of a MSI co-streamer, right? So with that being said, I wish you all the best. Take a moment to, reach the end of this video. I hope you guys peaceful life. If you're feeling stressed now, remember past moments of stress. Those moments passed. Why shouldn't this? It's very easy. I think they said this in Expedition 33. People trip over stones instead of focusing on the mountains. I'm paraphrasing, but the point is, sometimes the problems really make us feel like we drown. Sometimes they are not that important. And I think that considering life is so finite, we gotta, focus on the things that matter, because very little is in our controls, and all that stress that we feel, in a couple of weeks will be gone. So wish you all the best. Catch you later. Yamato, it's easy for you to say you're on vacation right now. Yeah, I get it. It's my first one in a long time. So it is what it is.